I'm a spy in the house of love. I know the dream that you're dreaming of. I know the word that you long to hear. I know your deepest secret fear. I know everything, everything you do, everywhere you go. Everyone you know. I'm a spy in the house of love. I know the dream that you're dreaming of. I know the word that you long to hear. I know your deepest secret fear. I know your deepest secret.
According to the National Security Agency documents declassified in 2005, the overwhelming body of reports told the story that no attack had happened. Even the US Navy had come out later and declared that it's clear the North Vietnamese naval forces didn't attack Maddox or Turner Joy that night on August 4th, 1964. Jim Morrison's father was willingly used by Lyndon Johnson as he deliberately lied and misled the American public into accepting the Vietnam War when he used the justification of the non-existent Gulf of Tonkin incident. It was a false flag operation. So much like when George W. Bush launched his war against Iraq, citing weapons of mass destruction in 2003, both based on nothing but lies and propaganda. In 1967, George Morrison was promoted to Rear Admiral. In Westpac, in 1968, he commanded a task group that was part of Task Force 77, commanded by Vice Admiral Ralph Cossins. The USS Hancock served as his flagship. Besides operations against communist forces in North Vietnam, the task force was diverted to Korea in December 1968 to support South Korean forces battling North Korean infiltrators during the Korean DMZ conflict. In 1972, he was appointed Commander Naval Forces Marianas. As such, he was in charge of relief efforts for Vietnamese refugees sent to Guam after the fall of Saigon in the spring of 1975. He called this assignment the most satisfying of his career.
Thousands of people were roaming Da Nang airfield.
It all began in Vietnam.
I look back and I think, what an incredible journey. And it has been quite a journey.
Her parents married and settled in Saigon, where they raised a family.
I was the second to the youngest of 8 kids.
Angry men left behind.
In 1975, as the Viet Cong invaded the South, fear and panic gripped the streets. When Saigon fell, Thuy and her family had to flee.
I didn't really realize that we would probably never return to Vietnam to live ever again. I didn't realize we were losing our country and our home.
To get out, the family had to split up. Half went by cargo ship, the other half by plane. On the boat, Twee and several siblings. On the plane, her mother, who made sure to bring one son.
She said she wanted to have at least one boy with her so that if we all died at sea, she would have a son to carry on the family name.
It was a perilous journey by sea. An American ship eventually rescued them. They were brought to a refugee camp in Guam and housed in a tent city. A few months later,
they discovered the other half of my family had landed in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, at a relocation center there.
A Lutheran church group in Duluth, Minnesota, sponsored the family. The family ended up in Silicon Valley, where chips replaced crops, and motherboards and microprocessors ruled. Her parents worked on the assembly lines, as did Twee during the summer.
I would be putting in the transistors and the capacitors.
She graduated from Cal with honors in rhetoric. At Berkeley, Twee fell in love with journalism.
This had to be one of the biggest ironies in the rock and roll world. The father, a willing participant in the deadliest American false flag up to date, which ended up enriching the military-industrial complex his son's contemporaries protested so much against. And, on the other side, you have the son, the poster boy for rebel without a cause, a raging stallion whose main vice was excess of all shapes and kinds, a man who lived for breaking the rules and pissing off the establishment. What if that contrast isn't ironic, but actually manufactured? Project MKUltra, sometimes referred to as the CIA's mind control program, and nowadays known as the Monarch program, was the code name given to an illegal set of experiments on human subjects, designed and undertaken by the United States Central Intelligence Agency. Experiments on humans were intended to identify and develop drugs, alcohol, stick and poke tattoos, and techniques to be used in interrogations and torture in order to weaken the individual to force confessions through mind control. The project coordinated with the Special Operations Divisions of the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps. The program began in the early 1950s and officially halted in 1973. But that stoppage was for appearances only. The program remains active today, and it engages in many illegal activities. In particular, it uses unwitting citizens as test subjects, which at the time led to controversy regarding its legitimacy. MKUltra used numerous methodologies to manipulate people's mental states and alter brain functions, including the surreptitious administration of drugs, mostly LSD, and other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, as well as various forms of torture. The scope of Project MKUltra was broad, with research undertaken at 80 different institutions, including 44 colleges and universities, as well as hospitals, prisons, military institutions, and pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated through these institutions using front organizations, although sometimes top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. As the U.S. Supreme Court later noted, MKUltra was concerned with the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. The program consisted of some 149 sub-projects, which the agency contracted out to various universities, research foundations, and similar institutions. At least 185 private researchers participated. Because the CIA funded MKUltra indirectly, many of the participating individuals were unaware that they were dealing with the agency. Project MKUltra was first brought to public attention in 1975 by the Church Committee of the U.S. Congress and a Gerald Ford Commission to investigate CIA activities within the United States. Investigative efforts were hampered by the fact that CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed in 1973. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to the project, which led to Senate hearings later that same year. In July 2001, some surviving information regarding MKUltra was declassified. The Black Bolt filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all documents about the program and its related projects back in the late 90s. Despite reports that MKUltra documents were destroyed in 1973, the CIA did locate some files and they did release some documents on 4 different disks around 2004.
At Stanford University near San Francisco, Dr. Harvey Weinstein is an associate professor of psychiatry, and he also counsels students.
Karen, why don't you tell me some more about the anxiety that you've been feeling?
I feel every time that I sit down at the desk.
Dr. Weinstein is a Montrealer who attended medical school at McGill University, but he refused to do his postgraduate work in psychiatry at McGill's Allen Memorial Institute because there his father had been used as a human guinea pig. He says he became a psychiatrist to unravel the horror of what happened to his dad, Louis Weinstein.
My father was a 49-year-old Montreal businessman who was successful and dynamic and whose life was destroyed by a series of treatments. He was someone who became anxious for a relatively short period of time, who went to get some help, and whose life was totally shattered by the experience.
His father was one of the more than 50 patients treated here at the Allen Memorial Institute under a secret program designed to develop brainwashing techniques. The Allen has an international reputation as a renowned psychiatric institution. But in the late 50s, the patients knew nothing of a cascade of mind control experiments underway, including sensory deprivation and worse.
He went in one winter evening and was put to sleep for approximately 2 months. He was given shock treatments of various kinds, gradually building intensity to an intensity and a frequency that was not certainly the routine or standard of the time.
Electroshock is a standard but controversial treatment for extreme depression. However, at the Allen, the shocks were administered not 2 or 3 times a week, but 3 or 4 times a day for weeks on end. Patients were reduced to vegetables. It was called depatterning. And on top of that, the patients were given dangerous experimental drugs.
He was given a whole slew of drugs, including amphetamines, likely PCP, insulin comas, barbiturates of all kinds, LSD. He was then forced to listen to recorded messages.
It was called psychic driving. Once the patients were drugged and shocked to break down their minds, they were bombarded with taped messages for up to 16 hours a day. This is how one patient remembers it.
At the end of the time, my father was someone who was unrecognizable to me or to anyone else in the family or his friends. He was someone who could not function in this world, whose perspective didn't extend beyond the next 5 minutes, who had no recollection of the past, and almost no recognition of the present.
The CIA was behind it. Documents pried loose in 1979 showed that through a front organization, the Central Intelligence Agency funded what was called the MKUltra Project. In Montreal, it was run by Dr. Ewan Cameron.
These are the days and hours are the occasion.
Cameron had a worldwide reputation as chairman of McGill's Department of Psychiatry and president of both the American and World Psychiatric Associations.
And it is his mind, no less, which may destroy mankind.
Attracted by Cameron's reputation, Dr. Mary Morrow went to study psychiatry under him. Instead, Cameron persuaded her to become a patient at the Allen. He drugged her, shocked her massively, erased 10 years of her memory, and even today, she has difficulty remembering some names and faces.
He decided to ignore all principles, all medical ethics and medical principles. He used one of his own colleagues, me. How low can he get?
Well, I suppose it could be said to have originated.
It wasn't as though Cameron didn't know what he was doing.
The Allen Memorial Institute itself were founded. They were
Dr.
both
Cameron
founded
was
in
present at the Nuremberg
1943.
trials. So I find that for someone who in 1945, 1946 was involved in evaluating and considering what the Nazis had done to helpless people in concentration camps, was 5 or 6 years later invading people's brains.
Victims of MK Ultra tend to develop multiple personality disorder as a result of their tortured mind's disassociation process. While it's very likely Jim Morrison was willingly or unwillingly used for CIA social engineering programs, that can be factually corroborated, just speculated. And as far as some of his friends claims that Morrison was possessed, that's also a characteristic of multiple personality disorder. At the time when the illegal Vietnam War was turning heads abroad and at home, in the early months of 1965, a new scene was just beginning to take shape in the city of Los Angeles. In a geographically and socially isolated community known as Laurel Canyon, a heavily wooded, rustic, serene, yet vaguely ominous slice of Los Angeles nestled in the hills that separate the city basin from the San Fernando Valley, musicians, singers, and songwriters suddenly began to gather as if they were summoned there by some unseen Pied Piper. Within months, the hippie flower child movement was born there, along with a new style of music that provided the soundtrack for the tumultuous second half of the 1960s.
So we've got this strange covert military installation looming over Los Angeles. In Santa Monica, we have the Rand Corporation, another spooky entity. This all looms over LA and the burgeoning entertainment scene, which takes us to the real point of the story, which is the rock and roll that came out of Laurel Canyon. And certainly the most famous or enigmatic figure to emerge from that scene would have to be Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, the lead singer of The Doors. But he also had a very conspicuous father. Tell us a little bit about Jim and his father and their place in that strange saga.
Yeah, Jim was certainly a larger-than-life figure, to this day, very, very iconic figure. Yeah, the curious thing about him is that his father was actually a very high-ranking Navy admiral, which that part was known prior to my work on this book. But what I discovered, which had not been previously reported, is that not just was he a Navy admiral, but he just happened to be the Navy admiral who oversaw the Gulf of Tonkin incident. He was the commanding officer of the ships involved in that notorious incident, which of course led immediately to the passage of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution and then to the full-scale involvement of ground troops in Vietnam, and ultimately the deaths of some 60,000 Americans and countless millions of Vietnamese and Laotian and Cambodian people, all of which was a direct result of this so-called Tonkin Gulf incident, which, Jim Morrison's father was a key figure, to say the least, in orchestrating that whole incident that quickly resulted in the U.S. being, engulfed in a very, very bloody quagmire over there. And that happened just like within a year or so of the sun emerging on the Laurel Canyon Sunset Strip scene as this larger-than-life icon of the anti-war, peace movement crowd. So there was a very curious juxtaposition there, to say the least, that you have the father sailing off to, helped choreograph this incident that drug America into this bloody quagmire, and then the son almost simultaneously emerging on the scene as this larger-than-life icon of the anti-war crowd. And never mentioning, of course, who his father was throughout his years of fame. He conspicuously avoided ever mentioning who his father was and what a key role he had played in.
And we can only guess as to why that was, but there's a picture in the book that shows Jim, the young Jim, the collegiate Jim, very clean-cut, preppy almost, with his father on the bridge of the what's the name of the ship?
Richard, I believe it was.
Bonham Richard, which was the ship in the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Correct, yeah.
So it gets even weirder because you discuss the fact that Jim, and I've had other people who are big Doors fans kind of confirm this to me independently, Jim was not really a likely candidate to be a rock star, and he wasn't even a musician.
Yeah, he had no musical background at all. By his own account, he had never had much interest in music, even as a fan. He said he'd only been to like 1 or 2 concerts, in his life. He didn't really listen to a lot of music. He never viewed himself as a singer. Never learned to read or write music. Never learned to play an instrument. Even after he achieved fame with the Doors, he never learned to read or write music or play an instrument. And by his own account, he was not. He'd had no musical training and had never viewed himself as a musician or singer-songwriter. And as you say, not long before he emerged as this figure that we see here, it was a very much different Jim Morrison, very clean-cut, collegiate, almost unrecognizable. Seeing his father off as he was about to leave, I think sailed out of San Diego for the Gulf of Tonkin, and within a year he had completely transformed himself physically and emerged as this rock star, just out of nowhere. It's just an amazing physical transformation and an amazing transformation from someone who had expressed no interest in music whatsoever to just like overnight becoming this huge international star.
He was, the Doors, the whole scene that they emerged from, largely considered to be the leaders of an anti-war movement. Obviously, we know what happened with the Doors as they continued, but what blew me away, Dave, Jim died the same day his father gave a speech on the decommissioning of the ship that he was the rear admiral on during the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah, it was very strange.
That's really weird.
Very strange timing, to say the least.
It's almost like both of their missions were done.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. Jim Morrison was just a fascinating guy, in a very short period of time from like 1964 to 1971, there were like 3 separate Jim Morrisons, really. He just had a remarkable ability to reinvent himself, from this clean-cut collegiate kid to this, this Greek god rock star, and then in the later years to a very overweight, heavily bearded, reclusive poet. And you look at pictures of Jim in these 3 eras, and which were very close together in time, and he looks like 3 completely different people. It's extraordinary, really, the capacity he had to reinvent himself, which is one thing that's given rise to various theories that he didn't actually die in Paris, but reinvented himself once again and went on under a new persona, which is not beyond the realm of possibility. But
I'm a spy.